Well, I thought I'd show you guys some photos of when I was a kid. What you're looking at in the top right, that little kid there holding some fish out, that's actually me. That was an old Apache trailer my dad bought, and my dad is actually sitting against the chair against the trailer. And he wanted that particular trailer because there was no tent, no canvas. It was all plastic. Even the sides that came out was all plastic. The condensation from this trailer was unbelievable. It was like almost every morning my mother would be up wiping down the insides of those plastics from the condensation, the dripping wet water that was coming in from this trailer. I don't know if it was more comfortable than a canvas trailer. He later bought a big 32 footer later, is what he did. It seems like every 5 years he would upgrade in trailers. And I don't have a whole lot of photos. We had a fire, we lost quite a bit. And back in those days, I mean, when you took a photo, you really wanted to take that photo because it was expensive. You had to get the photos basically developed, and sometimes you'd wait a week to 2 weeks to finally get that, and that was just a pain in the butt. So I've only got a few here for you to see. Like I said, most of them we lost, and when I was younger, you just didn't take that many photos because it was very expensive. Now, in this photo, the guy that's in the boat, which is a John boat, this was my grandfather. He was out there booting around. I don't have any idea why. It was so long ago. I'm not even in this photo. I think that's my dad kind of crunched down. And the other guy, I think that's one of my cousins. And the dog, I think that was my uncle's dog. But we would always go there every year. And when my grandmother was young, some guy had come around and asked, "Do you want to buy a ticket on a chance to win a cottage?" And she did. She bought like 4 or 5 of them, and they were like a quarter a piece or something. And everybody in that small town did. Well, lo and behold, she actually won. So she won this cottage on the water, which was dirt cheap back in those days. I mean, we're talking 2 generations, right? And when she finally passed away, she ended up giving it to the youngest out of the family, is what she did. So to this day, he actually owns it. And we're allowed to go down there anytime we want and go fishing or do anything we want. Now, this water, this stream, the way he's pointing goes up around an island and then it goes up toward a small rapids. So that's kind of cool. Now, this photo is my Uncle Barry. He's the youngest out of the family with my father's brothers. My father's mother had like 7 kids, so it was a big family. Back in those days, they had a lot of kids. Well, Barry had just gone up the river and caught his fill of fish. And here he's posing with his fish. You got pike, you got pickerel, you got bass. I mean, he's got quite a collection there, all proud of his catch for the day. One of the biggest things they would do every day is to see who could catch the most fish. And my dad was the winner all the time. And it was kind of funny. When it started getting a little bit dark and we were up the river, I'd be like, "So are we heading back? It's getting dark. You don't want to be driving that canoe in the dark. You can't see the rocks, the trees, or anything." And it was so funny. He'd say, "We haven't caught the biggest. We do have enough. We've probably beaten my brother. But we need to catch one that's big." And they had this stupid competition going on all the time. And I was just shaking my head. It was like, I'm going to be out here getting ate by mosquitoes because they want to catch the biggest fish. It was hilarious. Now, this photo is a little bit clearer. This is Uncle Stephen. Now, he lived up there 24/7. He helped the family out a lot. I mean, he would put fish in his freezer. He'd go deer hunting with us. He'd go on excursions. We would go into this place called Bruno Lake, and that's where this is. And the only way in there was just basically a trail going in, a hiking trail. And he would have his stuff scattered everywhere. So once you got part way in, you'd get the paddles, and then you go a little bit more ways in, and then you'd get something else, and then you go a little bit more ways in, and then you'd get, the boat motor, and then you go a little bit more ways in, and as you got closer to the river, you finally got the boat out. But in this situation, we had to portage everything in because everybody wanted to go on this great trip. And everybody did. Kids, cousins, uncles, everybody. And I always caught a lot of fish. Also got frog legs and things like that. But those were good times. This here is my dad's canoe. It was made from fiberglass. He hand painted it. The motor on the back, you can see there. And the Husky was my dad's dog. He actually trained that dog to sit in the front so the ass end of that canoe wouldn't go straight up and over. And that's a much smaller motor than I got. That's a 3.35 or something like that. I actually have that motor. It's sitting in the other room. Because when my dad started getting older, like I'd say when he started reaching, I guess about 65, 67, he stopped fishing after that. He just couldn't walk too good then. Which kind of scares me because I'm 60, right? So what does that mean? I got 5 years left. But the motor just sat. He never drained the oil. He didn't do anything to it, and it just sat. And it's sitting in the other room seized up right now. I'd have to take that thing apart to unseize it. I don't even know if it's any good because it sat so long. I mean, it sat for a good 10 or 15 years, and I ended up with it. The fiberglass canoe, the wood trim all the way around the top, he had this canoe a long time. It ended up rotting. I could remember when we got back from 2 and 3 week fishing trips up by my grandmother's cottage, we would flip that canoe over, and it would just have little holes, little pinholes everywhere from us dragging it over beaver dams, true rapids. I mean, the canoes took a beating back then. And we would fiberglass it. And it was one of the worst jobs I hated. We would literally be out in the backyard for a good couple of weeks. And we'd be sanding that canoe by hand. Because if you used a machine, he didn't want to give the machine to the kid because, you might just dig too far of a hole. So he'd give you hand sandpaper and maybe a little piece of 2x4. And you sand your ass up. And as you were sanding the fiberglass quickly, it smelt like, kind of like pears is what it smelt like. And then he'd come out and check it and rub his hand on it, and then he'd lay a layer of fiberglass, and we'd stand again in another layer of fiberglass, and we'd just keep building up. We'd build extra in the back where it was going to hit the rocks, so that way it would be less work for the following year. And that had to be done every time we came back from fishing. So here you have my grandfather on the right and my father in the white t-shirt with the sun kind of blocking his face. We weren't very good at taking photos, were we? Well, they'd gone out for the day, and that was their catch for the day, and they were showing it off. The other thing is kind of strange. Back in those days, I mean, everybody took a case of beer in the boat. I'm talking 24. That's how they're served in Canada. And it was Old Vienna. God, that beer tasted horrible. But my family drank it. Old Vienna was the beer of my family. And it was just crazy, but this is the middle of nowhere in Canada. It really is. My Uncle Barry one time went up the river, and he forgot his toolbox, his pliers and everything, which was really stupid. He caught a pike, pretty big one, got it in the boat, and when he went to take the hook out of its mouth, because he forgot the pliers, the fish made one flop, and it shoved the hook through his finger and out the other side, right dead center of his nail. And he couldn't get it out because of the barb. So now we had a horrible situation, and, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have any of that shit back then. So he's about 4 or 5 miles up the river, and he's got nothing to do. He's got both feet sitting on top of that pike. And now he had a motor, so he started the motor, he started to head back. Now he had 2 beaver dams to go over. So now him and that fish were in love with each other, and that's all there was to it. So he had to pull the canoe over the beaver dam while keeping that fish close to him. And I'll tell you, there was a lot of screaming, I'm sure. And then he got in, and then he got to the next beaver dam, did the same thing. When he pulled up in front of the cottage, which is the water you see out there in front of this picture, there was blood from one end of that canoe to the other. It was everywhere. It was crazy. I was the one that seen him pull up with the blood everywhere. I yelled, "Are you okay, Uncle Barry?" and he yelled, "Get your father!" So I ran to get my father, and because I was only 9 or 10, and my father come down, and he come down running, and he told him to hold that fish up against the canoe. He ran back up and got the pliers, and then he cut the end off where the barb was, because there's a barb, won't let that hook come out, right? So he cut the end of that off. He pulled it through. Okay, Barry had some relief, and then they had to drive to the hospital. Well, the nearest hospital was hour and 20 minutes just to get there. So they had him all wrapped up because he was bleeding bad. So they got him up there, and I think he passed out just in the parking lot when they pulled into the hospital. But he lived. Remember, no cell phones, no nothing back in those days. God, it's amazing we're still alive. This is a pretty nice picture. We used to, and this is my dad coming back with his dog in the front. And I wasn't with him that day. He went on this trip by himself. And if you went out and to the right, that's an island, and then you went around the island. Then there's a rapids there. So we spent a good part of our lives in this location. I mean, every year, because my dad worked in a factory, and he'd get like 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks paid vacation because he'd been there so long. And this is where we'd go. And you know, it's funny, it wasn't for family time, like you see people talking about on the internet. I mean, my dad always bought houses more than what he could afford. And then the only bill you could cut from was groceries, right? So when he went up to go fishing here, this was a job. This was not to go up there and have fun. And literally, we would get woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, I would, because I was the son. My sisters didn't. And we would head up that river, and we would be up there until dark. And then when we got back, it was my job to skin them. So I'd fillet all the fish. I'd, do catfish you do different. And I'd do them back in the bush away from the cottage. And literally, we were coming back with just tons and tons of fish. This was to give us a break on groceries at home. And it was crazy. I mean, we came home with 6 coolers full of fish. It was nuts. And being my dad liked to drink back in those days, I mean, there was a couple times he ended up totaling his cars. He'd come down some dirt road, go around the corner doing 90, go right off the corner into the trees. He put a car right between the trees, and if you look down, it was like a 20-foot fall. And he opened the car door without thinking and stepped out of the car, and he screamed all the way down. We heard him. He did it right on the corner of the cottage. And it was ridiculous. The tow truck had to pull it out, pulling it out. And it was nuts. He went down to a car lot in this town and bought himself another car. He always had great credit, my dad. Always did. But everything we did was never for fun time. It was always to take care of the groceries. It just was. Because he always wanted that bigger and better house. And it was kind of interesting. But that's the way my dad's life went. And there was good times. I mean, I loved fishing. I loved hunting. So to me, even being 14, 15, I mean, it didn't feel like a job to me. When he was waking me up at 6, it was like, yeah, let's go. I had good times, but to him, it was a job to offset the groceries is what it was. In this photo here, I'm actually in front of the canoe. My dad's in the back, but you'll notice there's no motor. Now, normally we'd leave and go to the right around the island, up across the rapids. In this situation, we went the opposite way. So we had a lot of portaging to do. We had to go over 4 sets of rapids. We had to go through 4 beaver dams. But when you got up there, the amount of fish you caught was unbelievable. So we had to lighten the entire canoe to make sure when we had to portage, we were making it as light as possible. And those fiberglass canoes, they were heavy. As you could see, back in those days when I was young, that's where I learned all about hunting, fishing, fixing things was from my dad. Hiking, you name it, I learned pretty much everything I know because of him. And we went places that people wouldn't even consider going today. I mean, there's no doctors, there's no cell phones. I mean, as we went up those rivers back then, there would be huge black snakes hanging off these dead trees. We had one drop in the boat once. And It was just the crazy stuff we did because you didn't have cell phones, so you didn't think about them. We didn't even take a first aid kit. I think we had a couple Band-Aids. That was about it. I mean, the biggest thing you heard, if you cut your hand or sliced your finger open, you stick your hand in the water, rinse it off, and wrap it around your T-shirt, and your old man would look at you and say, well, lick it off. Stop being such a damn girl. You know, this was the life we lived. And it was tough. You know, when I look at young men today and I see the way they are and how much, I mean, I hate to use the word, but pussy, I mean, they really are not men. And they are so mothered by their mothers anymore. It's just ridiculous. And it was something else. You never heard my mother question my dad about anything. If my dad was even doing something wrong, you never heard my mother question him. As far as she was concerned, my dad knew everything. And that was it. And what my dad said was gold. It was definitely a different time, I'll tell you. But there was no confusion. You weren't able to sit back and play one parent against the other. If you ever tried to do that, because I see kids doing that now, oh, you're deep shit. You know, I tried it. I mean, every kid's going to try something, right? And, you know, I went behind my old man's back and got my mother to agree, and then I took off with my friends type of thing, and as soon as I got home, I knew that was a death sentence. I knew it was coming. You know, because the first thing my dad said, he was sitting at that table, and look he had, hoo-hoo. He says, do you know the rule, right? You didn't all of a sudden just turn stupid in one day, did you? And I'd be sitting back saying, what do you mean? You know, I'm trying to play stupid, right? And he says, when one parent says no, it doesn't mean you convince another parent and then go above that parent's head. You know that, right? And I said, yeah, but I didn't go above anybody's head. You know, I'm trying to talk my way out of this. And he says, I specifically told you you're not going there. And you went to your mother and convinced her to let you go there. And then he'd start standing up and the belt would come off. You knew you weren't talking yourself out of that. And then it was like, hold out your hands. You know, you'd take 5 across each hand, and boy, that would hurt. You'd be doing a dance right there in the kitchen. And, you know, that's apparently capital punishment. That's wrong now. I mean, all this stuff going on. But none of us were the way kids are now. You know, you see kids robbing stores. You see kids chasing and just hurting people. And you didn't have any of that then. It didn't exist. You know, if you were a bad kid, your old man took care of it. And that was it. If the cops ever ended up at your door, all your father had to say to the police back then was, I'm really sorry this took up your time, officer. I will definitely take care of this. And you'd be standing in the back going, holy fuck, I'm dead. And I'm not kidding. The cops wouldn't charge you. Cops would say, all right, we understand, and they would leave. Now, there were other families. Sure, you had your bad families, and that didn't happen, but that's the way it was. You know, but at the same time, you had that quality time with your dad, and you had that time when your dad taught you things. It wasn't all him kicking the shit out of you, you know. And it wasn't like that. And if I wouldn't have had that discipline, and I'm going to be honest with you, if I didn't have that discipline from my dad back then, I probably would have ended up in jail. If my dad did not kick my ass, did not beat my hands with the belt, if he did not do those things, I would have been probably in jail for 20 years. Because I was a conniving little son of a bitch, and I'm being honest with you guys. Back then when I was 14, oh, I was horrible. I really was. And if it would have been just my mother raising me and not my dad, I definitely would have been in jail. No two ways about it. There was one time my parents split up, and my mother split up for about 2 weeks, and it was due to my dad's drinking. And within 3 days, I was in charge for shoplifting. No charges were laid at all. I never got charged for it. And it was shortly after that that my mother went back to my dad. And I think part of it was because of me. Because she seen her son getting in trouble, and her son never got in trouble with dad there. And that pretty much did it, I think. But, no, I was not a good kid. But I worked hard. My dad pushed me. And the only time he disciplined me was when I deserved it. It wasn't like he was hitting me for exercise. And usually when I got the belt, oh, I deserved it. Really bad. Like there was one time I had 2 buddies sleep over in a tent in the backyard. We went into my dad's garage and we stole his 5-gallon gasoline container. All right. We took that down to the park and there was like a pond out there and we dumped the gasoline in the pond and then we lit it on fire. I mean, we lit that whole fucking subdivision up. We had neighbors coming out, fire trucks showing up, cops. Just to look cool in front of my buddies, right? My dad knew I did it. Oh, when he seen that can of gas gone, that was it. Oh, I took like 15 across each hand. I really did. Oh, the stories I got would just blow your mind away. But if it wasn't for my dad's discipline, I probably wouldn't be the man I am today. But back then, men were hard. We weren't a bunch of little pussies running around saying, "Woe is me! I got a sliver in my finger." Times have certainly changed, and I'll tell you, I don't think it's for the good. Well, anyhow, hope you enjoyed the pictures. I don't have a lot of them, but I got a few.